The dying ship ***. Nova Carter's fingers ached, raw from scrubbing the engine bay's metallic grates. The acrid scent of coolant and burnt circuits clung to her skin, but she ignored it. She had learned long ago that exhaustion wasn't an excuse, hesitation meant punishment. Then the alarm started. A deep, guttural siren rolled through the ship, rattling the metal walls. Nova froze, heart hammering. She had heard battle alerts before, but this was different, sharper, more urgent. The Ebon vortex was in trouble. Shouts erupted from the corridors. Heavy boots thundered past, Vorkari officers sprinting toward the command deck. Nova pressed herself against the wall, staying out of sight. Slaves weren't allowed on the bridge, but she needed to know what was happening. She slipped into a narrow maintenance duct, her small frame making it easy to move unseen. The metal was ice-cold beneath her hands as she crawled toward the bridge ventilation grates. Below, the scene was chaos. Emperor Zalzireth loomed over his officers, his black and gold robes flowing like liquid shadow. His reptilian features were twisted in fury, golden eyes burning. "Explain," he growled, voice like grinding stone. An officer, his uniform crisp but his hands trembling, stammered, "We don't know. Systems are failing across the ship. Gravity stabilizers, propulsion, everything is shutting down." The Emperor's talons scraped against his throne's armrest. "Then find the problem before I start executing incompetence." Nova barely breathed. The Dominion's technology was leagues ahead of anything humans had once built, but she knew machines. She had spent years watching, listening, memorizing. And something about the reports felt wrong. She shifted position, angling for a better view of the holographic schematics flickering above the bridge console. There. A cascading systems failure, something deep in the ship's quantum stabilizers. The officers were too focused on individual malfunctions to see the root cause. Her stomach twisted. She shouldn't interfere. Speaking up could mean death. But if the stabilizers failed completely, the ship would drift into the gravity well of the nearby dying star. The Ebon vortex would be torn apart. She had two choices: keep silent and die with the ship, or take a chance. Nova inhaled sharply, then dropped from the vent. The sound of her landing was swallowed by the chaos, but when she stepped forward, voices faltered. Dozens of Vorkari eyes snapped to her. Some looked outraged, others amused. A human slave, stepping onto the bridge unbidden? Unthinkable. "Kill her," one of the engineers sneered. "Wait." The single word from Zalzireth silenced the room. The Emperor's gaze pinned her in place, cold and calculating. Nova clenched her fists to stop them from shaking. I know what's wrong with the ship." Murmurs spread like wildfire. Some laughed. Others looked ready to strike her down for the insolence. Zalzireth leaned forward, expression unreadable. "You know?" Nova nodded. "It's not separate failures. It's a cascade. The quantum stabilizers are misfiring. The power surges are causing system-wide malfunctions. If they aren't reset, the ship will be crippled completely, and fall into the star's gravity well." Silence. Then the head engineer spat, "Lies. This human knows nothing of our technology." Nova forced herself to stand taller. "Check the readings. The stabilizers aren't offline. They're misaligned. Your own diagnostics are looking for system failures, but the stabilizers are still feeding power into the ship. It's corrupting everything." Another pause. Then a technician hesitantly tapped at a console. The holographic display flickered, recalibrating. Gasps rippled through the bridge. The readouts matched her words exactly. The engineer's face twisted in fury. Coincidence? Enough. Zalzireth rose from his throne. The bridge was deathly quiet as he descended the steps, stopping mere inches from Nova. He was huge, towering over her, his presence suffocating. He studied her the way one might examine a peculiar insect. "You claim you can fix it?" Nova's throat was dry, but she nodded. "Yes." The Emperor considered her for a long moment. Then, to everyone's shock, he stepped aside. "Do it." Nova exhaled shakily and turned toward the nearest console. She had just gambled with her life. Now, she had to make sure she won. Chapter 2, A Child's Genius ****. The bridge's oppressive silence weighed on Nova as she stepped toward the nearest control panel. Dozens of alien eyes bored into her, some filled with contempt, others with cold curiosity. The Emperor himself stood motionless, observing like a predator deciding whether she was prey or something else entirely. Nova had no time to dwell on it. Her fingers hesitated over the console's glowing interface. The Dominion's technology was advanced, but she had spent years memorizing its systems while working unnoticed in the engine bay. She knew enough to find her way, if she could just think fast enough. She tapped the diagnostic controls, pulling up the ship's quantum stabilizer schematics. The error was clear. The stabilizers weren't offline, they were misfiring in chaotic cycles, disrupting every major system on board. "Core output is fluctuating," one of the engineers muttered behind her. "It's like it's fighting itself." Nova ignored him. The ship's automated repair systems were designed to shut down malfunctioning components, but the stabilizers weren't failing in a way the system recognized. The software kept pushing power through, feeding the instability instead of fixing it. A manual reset would force them back into sync, but that required direct access to the ship's core. She turned sharply. "I need to get to the engine room." A ripple of laughter spread through the gathered officers. One sneered. "A human slave thinks she can waltz into the heart of the ship?" Nova clenched her jaw. "Unless you have a better idea, we'll all be dead in 20 minutes. The bridge's main display flickered, highlighting their slow drift toward the dying star's gravity well. Time was running out. Zalzirith exhaled slowly. "Escort her." A burly Vorkari guard stepped forward, armored in deep crimson plates. His sharp, scaled face twisted with disdain, but he said nothing as he motioned for her to move. Nova swallowed hard and followed. The journey to the engine bay was a gauntlet of suspicion. Crew members stopped in their tracks, whispering as she passed. She ignored them, focusing on the task ahead. The doors hissed open, revealing the heart of the ship. Massive conduits ran along the walls, pulsating with unstable energy. The core chamber thrummed with erratic pulses of violet light, its usual smooth rhythm shattered. Sparks rained from malfunctioning control panels, and technicians shouted over the alarms. One of the engineers turned, his pale blue skin flushing darker with anger. "What is she doing here?" "Fixing what you couldn't," Nova shot back, stepping past him toward the stabilizer interface. The Emperor's guard growled but didn't intervene. Nova worked fast, hands flying over the console. The stabilizers were completely out of sync. She needed to decouple them, manually realign each core, then bring them back online together. Her pulse pounded as she typed out a sequence, overriding the automated repair systems. A warning flashed, "Manual reset required at core access panel." "Of course." She turned to the engineers. "I need someone to access the primary stabilizer relays and decouple the cores when I give the signal." The Vorkari technician scoffed. "I won't take orders from a human brat." Nova exhaled sharply. "Then enjoy being vaporized." Silence. Finally, the engineer snarled but moved to the relay controls. Nova sprinted toward the core chamber. The heat was suffocating, waves of energy radiating from the pulsing machinery. She climbed onto the central maintenance platform, reaching for the stabilizer's manual control panel. Her fingers danced over the switches, heart hammering. One mistake, and the power surge could overload the ship's core instead of fixing it. "Ready," she shouted. The engineer hesitated, then responded. "Ready." Nova inhaled sharply. "Now." She yanked the release lever. The stabilizers powered down in a single violent jolt. The ship lurched. Lights flickered. For a terrifying second, everything went dark. Then, the core stabilized. Energy hummed back into the conduits, smooth and steady. Systems flickered back online one by one. Nova let out a shuddering breath. The ebon vortex was no longer dying. She turned, expecting outrage. Instead, she found the engineers staring at her, stunned. Even the Emperor's guard looked unsettled. Then, a voice crackled over the comms. "Report." Nova exhaled. "It's done." The ship was safe. But her fate? That was still uncertain. Chapter 3, The Turning Point ***. Nova stood motionless in the engine bay, sweat clinging to her skin, her breath steady but shallow. The ship's core hummed with a smooth, rhythmic pulse. Systems flickered back online across the control panels, stabilizers fully synchronized. The crisis was over. Yet no one moved. The engineers stared, expressions caught between disbelief and resentment. The Emperor's crimson-armored guard loomed nearby, talons flexing. They had witnessed the impossible. A mere human, a child no less, had saved the ebon vortex when some of the finest minds in the Dominion had failed. Nova wiped her hands on her ragged uniform, swallowing down the tremor in her chest. The moment of triumph felt razor-thin. If she spoke wrong, if she moved too quickly, they could still decide to kill her for the offense of proving them incompetent. A sharp hiss of static burst from the overhead speakers. "Bring her to the bridge." The Emperor's voice. The order sent a chill down Nova's spine. There was no anger in his tone, no hint of what was coming next. The guard jerked his head toward the exit. "Move." She obeyed, feet heavy as she walked the long path back. The corridors, once filled with frantic crew members, had gone eerily quiet. Word had spread. By the time she stepped onto the bridge, every officer was waiting. Zalzireth sat upon his throne, golden eyes locked on her the instant she arrived. His gaze held something she couldn't quite read, more than just curiosity, more than just cold calculation. The air was suffocating. She took a deep breath and faced him. "The ship is stable." One of the officers scoffed. An insult. A slave speaking before the Emperor? Zalzireth lifted a single clawed hand, and the room fell silent. "Explain," he commanded. Nova's mind raced. What did he want her to say? That she had acted to save herself? That she had risked everything to avoid a death she hadn't been ready for? No. That wasn't enough. She straightened. "I saw what your crew didn't. I understood what they failed to grasp. And I acted." A murmur rippled through the bridge. Some officers looked ready to strike her down for her audacity, but the Emperor did not react. He only studied her, his expression unreadable. Finally, he rose from his throne. The movement was deliberate, slow, as if testing the weight of the moment. "You defied expectation," he said, stepping down from the dais. "You accomplished what my engineers could not." He stopped mere inches away, his towering frame casting a shadow over her. "You are human," he continued, voice smooth but edged with something dangerous. "Weak. Small. Inferior by every standard of the Dominion." The words burned, but Nova didn't flinch. "And yet," he went on, "you stand here, having saved my ship." Another silence. This one felt heavier. She forced herself to hold his gaze. "Yes." Zalzireth exhaled, a sound almost like amusement. "You interest me, child." Nova's hands clenched at her sides. Interest could mean many things. A new test. A new cage. A different kind of death. The Emperor turned his head slightly. "If I were to order your execution now, my crew would see it as justified." A slave stepping out of her place, challenging Dominion order. Her breath caught, but she refused to look away. "And yet," he mused, "to discard something of value is foolish." The tension in the room shifted. The officers glanced at one another, uncertain. Zalzireth regarded her for a long moment, then turned back toward his throne. "Your status as a slave is revoked." A stunned silence followed. Nova's heart lurched. She replayed the words, certain she had misheard. The Emperor sat, resting his clawed hand against the throne's armrest. From this moment forward, you will serve as an engineer under my command. Whispers filled the bridge. Some voices carried outrage, others quiet intrigue. Milva barely breathed. Freedom wasn't what she had expected. She had thought, at best, she would be returned to the engine bay, left to survive another day. But this? She lifted her chin. Why? A flicker of something almost like amusement passed through the Emperor's expression. Because I do not waste assets. His gaze sharpened. And because you are the first human to make me reconsider what your kind is capable of. She swallowed hard. This was not safety. This was a new battlefield, one where her worth would be tested every day. But it was something. Milva bowed her head, a gesture of acknowledgement, not submission. Then I won't disappoint you. Zal Zyrith leaned back in his throne, golden eyes gleaming. We shall see.